So, James, 8 years, 102 games. Gareth Southgate has announced his decision to resign as England manager, less than 48 hours after losing the Euros final to Spain in Berlin. So, initial reactions: surprised, shocked, expected?
Yeah, I think we thought it was coming. I think the only thing that cast a little bit of doubt over it was just how England sort of defied themselves really to reach the final and making another bit of history, first ever final on foreign soil, back-to-back Euros finals. The results almost were the only thing to recommend them really. And of course, in tournament football, that is all that matters. But the mood around the camp had been pretty negative for a long time. Obviously, Gareth Southgate was, booed. His name was booed before matches in the group stage. The team were booed off in two of their matches. He had beer cups thrown at him by the fans at one point when he went to go and acknowledge them. And that was when they topped the group. So there was this sort of bubbling undercurrent of resentment towards him for a while. I think there was a lot of frustration about the way that the team was playing with all these attacking players, and England's strengths didn't seem to be playing to them with all of the individual talent, attacking talent that they had. And it's odd because even though he's overseen such a sustained period of relative success in terms of England being in the business end of tournaments, it just at the same time felt like the cycle had run its course and it was over and it was time for a bit of change.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were both there in 2016 when England lost to Iceland in the Euros, and the mood after that was so bad that it was, Sam Allardyce came in for the one game, and that was a brief kind of respite from the Roy Hodgson regime. But obviously, Sam Allardyce left, and Gareth came in as a kind of a two-game interim coach, and then he stayed. And as we know, that at that point, the expectations were so low that when he went to Russia in 2018, got to the semi-finals, it was a real kind of new dawn. And I think the fact that he now leaves, having got to a second major final, having lost it and losing, it wasn't quite good enough. I think that shows how high he's raised the bar. So I think there's two ways to look at Southgate in the sense that he completely rehabilitated England as a global nation. I think England are once again a powerhouse on the world stage, because they weren't for many years before that. But obviously the style of football and the sense that he's not got enough out of, and it sounds ridiculous, he's got to two finals, but he's not got enough out of a talented generation of players. I do think it is time for a change, in the sense that a coach with new ideas. But I do worry that the coach that the FA will prioritise are not the right coaches for the job. But I understand that they'll want initially an English coach, because they've put so much money and time and effort into St George's Park and redrawing the coaching setup. It makes sense that as a major nation they want an English coach. But I don't think the candidates out there are either A, good enough, or B, gettable. I don't think we're going to talk about the candidates in a minute, but Eddie Howe is the leading candidate. But I don't think Eddie Howe would leave Newcastle. Why leave a top Premier League job, big salary, to manage England when you're in a very good Premier League job? Graham Potter, we can discuss his credentials shortly, but obviously right now it seems that those two are the leading candidates.
Yeah, look, I mean, a big part of Gareth Southgate's legacy actually is intangible, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why he won't necessarily get the immediate credit he deserves, and that is the culture that he's built. You can't really put your finger on that, and the buy-in from the players. People take that for granted now. They look at this group of players and they think, oh, well, in 2026 they can go and win the World Cup. They've got to want to be there. They've got to want to put themselves through what will be an arduous 48-team tournament at the end of another long Premier League season. Obviously, you've got players in Spain and elsewhere in Germany as well. So you can't take that for granted. And what Gareth Southgate has done is taken a really disparate group that a lot of them didn't really want to be there. You mentioned that Iceland game. It was the absolute nadir really for English football, arguably ever. And they didn't want to be part of it. They felt the pressure and responsibility. The fans didn't like the team. There was a real disconnect. The media environment around it was quite toxic. He transformed all of that. And it's easy now, if you look at this team today and think, oh, well, that will just continue. It doesn't work like that. There's no guarantee that the next manager will be able to bring that in. And the only thing I would say is that if they get the next appointment wrong and some of those issues start coming back, players start maybe shirking call-ups, or they don't really want to be there, or the fans start getting quite critical, or there's a bit of tension between the media and the players again, then we will look back on this period and think we had it pretty good, didn't we, here? And we're talking about a penalty shootout away at Wembley from winning the European Championship, and they were 4 minutes away from extra time on Sunday night in Berlin. So, they are very, very fine margins. And I do think probably Southgate, his reputation will rise as the distance increases from the tenure. I think it's easy now to sort of be quite critical of him. And look, I'm not saying he doesn't have his faults, but I do think he's very steeped in English football history. He understands it better than most, and he really wanted it. You know, this was his ultimate job, to be the England manager and want to deliver the first trophy in what would have been 58 years had they won it last weekend. And again, you don't necessarily know you're going to get that from another manager. You don't know whether you're going to have that inner drive, that inner determination, that innate understanding of English football and the history of it. Now, turning to who's next, well, that's why that would lead that towards a Graham Potter and Eddie Howe, because you would think just logically that an Englishman would kind of understand that a little bit better. But you're talking about two managers there who don't have a lot of experience of dealing with big players, with the big names on the biggest stages. You're asking them to step up. Eddie Howe's obviously done that more. Graham Potter had that period at Chelsea, but it didn't go well. And let's be honest, there were a lot of times where he looked a little bit like a rabbit in headlights with the focus and the scrutiny on him. I don't think he was fully prepared for the step up. Now, Chelsea is a bit of a circus as a club at times, but England, you know, there's no more scrutiny on any manager anywhere really than the England national team job. And it's not, to me, it's a lot of people just want to see, oh, let's get a more progressive, more exciting, maybe a little bit younger coach in who can come and really take these attacking players and mold them into a unit that goes to take 2026 by storm. You're taking a lot for granted there. You know, the last bit is just the progressive coach bit.
I just, and I'll say it now, Graham Potter, I don't think Graham Potter has got the credentials to go into that dressing room and command the respect of the players. Now, you know, he's come through the ranks. He's managed it in Sweden. He managed at Swansea and Brighton. He's had that great career path. Chelsea was too much for him. At Chelsea, he couldn't handle the expectation, the big stars in the dressing room. Now, I don't think he walks into the dressing room and says to Jude Bellingham, to Harry Kane, right, lads, this is how we're going to do it. It reminds you of David Moyes at Man United. He's not got anything on his CV to say, I've done this. He's never played for England. And I think that helped Gareth Southgate a lot in the sense that he had a distinguished England career. You know, he played at multiple major tournaments, playing under Terry Venables, the most forward-thinking coach England have had for the last 50 years. So he had those credentials. If the players ever questioned his judgment, he would say, well, I played at Euro 96 semi-final, I went to a World Cup. So Potter doesn't have that. Eddie Howe, I think Eddie Howe has got more in his locker. I think he's got more proven credentials. He's worked at a higher level for a longer time. I think you've seen how he's turned Newcastle around. He's dealt with a lot of big issues there. I think he's probably ready for the job more than Potter is. But again, I just don't see how, unless he has an issue at Newcastle right now. We know there are changes behind the scenes at Newcastle with Amanda Staveley leaving the club. That he may decide that his future there isn't as stable as he wants it to be. But I do think that's going to be a hard get for the FA. And there's another name that you're going to mention right now that we haven't talked about. But before we talk about him, who's not an English coach, I just want to chuck in two more names, because these two guys had the credentials at the international stage. They both managed club level, but they haven't been successful. Steven Gerrard and Frank Lampard. Now, they would have that credential with the players in terms of reputation, but would they be able to sell those players or those names to the public because of what they, you know, Gerrard has had success at Rangers. Lampard has had limited success at Derby and a little bit with Chelsea, but not quite successful. Are those guys out of the running, or do they have a chance because of their playing credentials?
I think they do have a chance. I think they may be part of the conversation, because I think what this comes down to is how ruthless the FA want to be. Because if we look at if it was a level playing field and we weren't looking at the colour of the passport, as Arsene Wenger used to say, then the leading candidates are not English. They just aren't. But do they want to go down the route where they have the head of the women's game and the head of the men's game, both foreign coaches, when they talk a lot about the pathway, they talk a lot about St George's Park being this place, the breeding ground of coaches and players who can come through the ranks, understand, you know, exactly in the way that Southgate did. He joined as head of elite development in 2011. Obviously, you mentioned his playing career. He's come through that pathway and led the team, and they're very proud of that, and they really want that to be promoted to the next generation of younger coaches. What does it say about that plan and that long-term strategy if they just go to a Thomas Tuchel or a Mauricio Pochettino? But I have to say that those two, I mean, look, if we remove Jurgen Klopp from this, because he has talked about obviously being on sabbatical. He may never manage again, although I think most people think he probably will take a job in some form. But to take it now, I think a job of that sort of profile is probably unlikely. You'd have to say Tuchel and Pochettino are really outstanding candidates on the basis that Tuchel's got the pedigree, he's won the Champions League, he's managed big clubs, big names, PSG, Dortmund, Bayern, Chelsea obviously as well. And Pochettino is a really interesting one for me because the technical director at the FA is a guy called John McDermott, and they worked together, Pochettino and McDermott, at Spurs. My understanding is they're still very close. They still speak a lot. And the fact that McDermott will have such a heavy say in who is the next England manager would suggest that at the very least they will have a conversation with Pochettino. And Pochettino's made it quite clear that he loves English football. He loves the Premier League. He loves being here. He stayed, I think, predominantly in London. So, there's an obvious fit there. And I think he would be interested in speaking to the FA, but of course he is Argentinian. The first press conference you and I, we've talked about this before, would be: is it Malvinas? Is it Falklands? Do they want to go down this road? Obviously, Tuchel is German. There's obviously that history there between Germany and England, not necessarily insurmountable, but it's certainly an obstacle that both parties would have to overcome. But yeah, the English candidates they're not compelling, and I think if the FA have got anything about them, they have to do this properly, and the due diligence is that they have to speak to as broad a range of candidates as possible. They've proved with Weigmann that they're not opposed, this sort of current regime are not opposed to appointing a foreign coach. But I do think they owe it to themselves to speak to a broader range than just think, okay, we're going to go English, but maybe we'll speak to one or two overseas, but we want an Englishman.
I think Pochettino is a really interesting name because obviously he's out of work right now, and after what happened at Chelsea, and I think he's at the stage in his career whereby, he's managed PSG, he's managed Chelsea, he's twice been close to the Man United job and not got it. I don't know what his next job is in the club game. I don't quite know where he goes from now. I don't see him getting a Real Madrid or a Bayern Munich. I think he's at a very interesting stage of his career whereby he will have to consider his next post very carefully. I mean, there's also a possibility, I think it's an outside possibility, that he might be considered for the USA job as well, because, again, he's out of work. He would tick a lot of boxes for the US, multilingual, could tap into a lot of communities in the US. But I do think that he will want a big challenge, and the England job is a bigger challenge, I guess, than the USA job. But the USA job it's kind of a no pressure job, isn't it? In the sense that you got a home World Cup in 26 where you get out of the group and you're successful. With England, you're expected to win it, and it's going to be a hard World Cup in 2 years' time. 48-team World Cup, 5.5 weeks. England players are always tired when they get to a World Cup, so they'll be tired before they get off the plane. So then that's going to be a challenge for Pochettino. I think personally, I would love to see Jurgen Klopp as the England manager. I think the FA in the past have shown ambition, quite a long time ago with Sven-Göran Eriksson and Fabio Capello. But I think Klopp gets the Premier League. He's a personality that the players would love, that the fans would buy into. But yes, you're right. I've been told that he wants at least a year off. But, would the FA be prepared to wait for Klopp? We do know there's a potential interim. All we've got the rest of this year is a Nations League group, Nations League Group B, I think it is. Ireland, Finland, and Greece. Not the most challenging group, not the most exciting group, to be honest. So the FA will have World Cup qualifiers to consider in the early part of 2025. But if it's a case of waiting for the right man for the job, then do everything you can to persuade Jurgen Klopp. Doesn't matter what it takes. England can afford it.
I thought it was quite interesting. Yeah, I thought it was quite interesting that in Mark Bullingham's statement that he mentioned that they had an interim option if required, which sort of suggests that they're not going to. I mean, I think, look, we reported last week, a lot of outlets did, that the FA wanted Southgate to stay on, and part of that reason is, he's obviously the job that he's done, yes, but also he is a lightning rod for the FA. There are senior figures there who don't have to speak as often as they would do otherwise. You go back a few years and think about how often you'd see Greg Clark or Greg Dyke or the FA chairmen or FA chief executives, Martin Glens of the sort of previous years, would tend to be a little bit more visible. They don't kind of have to be now. Yes, because the team's more successful, so there's kind of fewer sort of structural conversations about the sort of grander nature of English football, the wider nature of the game, but also because of how good a spokesman Gareth Southgate is. So we don't really know how ruthless these guys are going to be. I just hope that what they try and do is identify the best man for the job, not the best man that fits the FA vision, because I'm not sure they're the same thing based on the candidates that are available.
I think that there's also been, again, I won't say embarrassment is the right word, but there's a sense that a major nation like England shouldn't have a non-English coach. You look around the major nations right now, and they're all pretty much coached by, Germany's coached by Jurgen Nagelsmann, France, Didier Deschamps, etc. The Netherlands, Ronald Koeman. But don't forget, Brazil were about to appoint, or wanted to appoint Carlo Ancelotti 6 months ago. So that would have been an incredible step. Brazil, of all teams, appointing not only a non-Brazilian, but a European. So I think it's possible.
Yeah.
I think let's chuck Carlo Ancelotti in, because we know that Xabi Alonso, it seems, is waiting for the opportunity to take over at Real Madrid. In a year's time, or this time next year, Carlo Ancelotti could be available. I mean, what a coup that would be for the FA to have an Ancelotti who could, the ultimate big player manager. Now, England have got a lot of big players. I just think it would be foolish of the FA to rush into appointing an English coach right now when they have time on the side. You know better than me. I don't know when the World Cup qualifiers start. I'm assuming it's next March. So there's quite a bit of time. So there's a little bit of time to get something done. And Jurgen Klopp wants a year off. Fine, get that. Next March will be 10 months. It's not that long, is it really?
Yeah, no, and look, I mean, the fact, as I say, that they've flagged this interim option, that could be. I'm trying in the process of trying to find out exactly what that is, but I'm assuming that one of those options could be that Lee Carsley steps up, and of course Gareth Southgate did the same thing. He was under 21s manager, he stepped in on an interim basis, did well, thought, okay, maybe I can take this on, and maybe there's an opportunity there for Lee Carsley to do the same. I mean, it feels a reach, if I'm honest, but it's not impossible. And also, if you look at, I mean, what the FA could do is look at the last two major tournament winners. Scaloni and De La Fuente. They managed at academy level. They don't have a big pedigree in club football or international management elsewhere. They may look at that and think, well, it's not as if the manager, this appointment is a panacea that whoever we appoint will just win us the World Cup. They may look at it and think, well, is there a way that we can satisfy, yes, our own FA pathway, but also fit the profile of a manager who has won past tournaments?
Just throwing forward against the players now, after major tournaments, a lot of players will often say, that's the end of my career, I want to move on. Now, I guess you've got a few players, maybe Kyle Walker's one. I don't think Harry Kane's in that bracket. I think he's too. I think Kyle Walker's certainly one who may decide, new regime, move on. And another player that may come back is Ben White. I mean, what is Ben White's scenario now that Gareth Southgate and Steve Holland are on? So do you think this will be a change of the guard in terms of players that may stay or may go?
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, you're right. Kyle Walker, I think the noises around Kyle Walker before Qatar was that would be his last tournament. And then I think Gareth convinced him to stay on to Euro 2024. And then he was talking around this summer about, looking at players who got to, Pepe, for example, who got to sort of 40 odd, and maybe he could still play on for another sort of 2-4 years. But I think because the players, look, I mean, it wasn't always a love-in, but I think the players, broadly speaking, all really love Gareth and kind of, bought into the culture that he's provided. There will be a few that will be considering their positions. There are obviously a few who didn't get on with him, and Ben White was one of them that had, as much as they have denied it, that Ben White had an issue with Steve Holland in Qatar, and that led to a breakdown in the relationship that hasn't been repaired. Now, you would assume that Ben White will now make himself available for England, or at the very least there will be a conversation there to be had with the new manager and Ben White next season. Look, I mean, one or two others. Does Jordan Henderson come back into the fray now? Probably not.
So if Jurgen Klopp's in charge.
Well, if Jurgen's back, he might be captain, mightn't he? Harry Maguire. I mean, I think lost in sort of everything else. I thought Mark Gahey was fantastic for England in this tournament.
Absolutely.
And I was one of many people who sort of flagged the lack of centre back options. John Stones had played, I think, started one Premier League game since mid-March and was playing a lot in midfield for City anyway. And he'd lost his main central defensive partnership in Harry Maguire, and for Gahey to come in, and those two were rock solid for long periods of that tournament. And Gahey, I think he'll be getting a big move this summer, and you could see him being a real fixture coming forward. So it's hard to see maybe Maguire getting back in now.
Raheem Sterling's another name. Raheem Sterling has been overlooked by Gareth Southgate for the last 18 months. And, Raheem Sterling is still young. I mean, I guess it depends on who comes in, but he's another player that may factor in and be young enough in the USA in 2 years' time.
Yeah, I mean, Marcus Rashford's another one. I mean, obviously he's got to get himself together at club level first. But yeah, you look at some of those players who missed out: Jack Grealish, James Maddison. Maddison took a long time to win over Gareth. And Gareth was always somebody who he didn't, character was very important to him, especially in tournaments. He didn't I think he'd been part of squads where there'd been cliques, it had been fractious. You have sort of arrogant, difficult personalities who are away for a long period of time. They can have a corrosive effect on the group, particularly if they're people who aren't playing. And I think for people like James Maddison and Grealish, who maybe needed to grow up a little bit when they were younger, they took a long time to get into the squads and a long time to win Gareth over. And you never know in the final reckoning whether that, just lingering at the back of Southgate's mind, were factors in deciding not to take them, particularly with a 26-man squad that's expanded. You've got more players that aren't involved out to Germany. So, yeah, these guys will all think this is a sort of start of a new dawn for them, really.
So I was in Berlin airport yesterday. I was waiting to board my flight. This whole figure walked towards me, shuffling around. It was Fabio Capello. Now, Fabio Capello was walking back to board his flight to Italy. And it just got me thinking about how it seems so long ago now that the FA brought Capello in and they got that one wrong. He was brought in as the kind of this coach, the great trophy-winning CV, but the players just didn't buy into him at all. He was too strict. They couldn't handle his approach. That is the massive thing. I mean, just getting back to the manager, the next guy, and I don't know if you want to pick a successor, but getting it right in terms of relationships with players is possibly just as important in the international team as getting the tactics right.
Well, it is, but I mean, I guess the only thing to say about that, though, is that Capello, his English was terrible, and he didn't really have any grounding in the English game. Whereas if we're talking about, let's just say Pochettino, Tuchel, and maybe Klopp are the three, possible sort of foreign options. Well, all of them have got extensive experience of being in England. They're all very good communicators. Their English is all pretty good. I don't think there's the same obstacles there. But, Pochettino, you talk about culture. I mean, Pochettino really created that positivity at Tottenham. He wasn't able to do it at Chelsea because I think there was just so much going on above him, so much change, so much transition. The squad overhaul was just so dramatic, very difficult to sort of instill that while you're trying to win games every week. Difficult because I'm like the FA, I think I'm torn between. I think my choice would be Pochettino, but I sort of feel like they should, on principle, go English. But I'm not really convinced by Eddie Howe or Graham Potter. So I find myself thinking, I don't really know who I'd actually want here.
I think they should go for Lampard and Gerrard, see if it can work together. We've had this debate over the years,
I mean, finally those two, with Paul Scholes off to the left somewhere.
Yeah, and Michael Carrick just looking on the outside, just thinking, can I get a look in? Maybe he can be the coach. But anyway, I think we both believe that England have got a big job on their hands. And I agree with you. I think Pochettino will be a good shot. I am going to nail my colours to the Jurgen Klopp mast. It's very unrealistic, but I do think he will be the perfect candidate. But just one question to finish. Would the FA have the ambition and the money to go for Pep Guardiola? It looks like his contract expires at Man City next summer. Is Pep Guardiola even... he's been mentioned with it in the past. I'd never really bought into it. I don't think I don't think Pep Guardiola is really going to take the England job, but he's the best coach that this Premier League has possibly ever seen. Does the FA have the ambition and the money to do it?
Do they have the money? Yes. Do they have the ambition? Probably not. I remember when that got leaked. It felt to me that sort of suggestion was leaked around the time that it was, to sort of say, well, what would people think about, if we went for a foreign manager? Is there this sort of feeling that we kind of have to go English? It felt to me like they were sort of testing the waters a little bit there. I could be completely wrong with that. Just that was the feeling I got. Look, Guardiola would excite everybody, just to see what he would do with that group of players, to see what he would do at international level, full stop. But I can't see it. I don't think he'd take it. I don't think they'd go for him. I think they would. I just don't think it's a starter, really.
So England's next game, the final question, is Republic of Ireland in Dublin in September. Do you think they'll have a manager in place by then, or do you expect an interim?
I think they will make an appointment. They've got, this is the earliest possible post-tournament cycle opportunity to do it. Obviously, the last one finished 48 hours ago. So They've got time, they've got available candidates, and also if they're going to go for someone like Eddie Howe, for example, they kind of need to, out of respect to Newcastle, they need to do that pretty quickly because players are, obviously going back for pre-season, clubs are going away, they're starting their preparations for the new Premier League campaign, and if they were to wait, say, 3 weeks and then decide they want to go for Eddie Howe, that's going to make it an awful lot harder and an awful lot more difficult, those conversations with Newcastle. So I think they'll, if they can identify a target and move for him, and remember, we're talking about some people who are out of work here, so that obstacle is removed. I think if they can identify them fairly quickly, there's absolutely no reason why they shouldn't have a manager in for that game.
Well, I'm hoping for Jurgen Klopp, and I'm expecting Graham Potter, so we'll wait and see, but we'll soon find out. So England play next game in September. Will they have a new manager in charge? We'll wait and see.